Fraser Rose is a career educator and counseling specialist who has served many years as a principal in Ontario schools, both public and private, both elementary and secondary. During the time he was supervising principal of schools on the Canadian Forces Base in Trenton, he was elected to 4 terms of office as a trustee on the Hastings County Board of Education and served as chairman of that board for 2 terms. For the past 20 years, he has been a high school principal in Toronto. Fraser Rose's purpose will be to leave each person with a crystal clear idea of what each type of relationship is and the challenge to make all their interpersonal relationships a win-win whenever possible.
Julie, I think you forgot the first portion of the introduction. Win, lose. No problem.
Okay, Fraser Rose will be our speaker for this week. He'll be speaking about the 4 forms of interpersonal relationships: win-lose, win-win, lose-win, and lose-lose.
Thank you very much. I mean, if my speech goes, it's a bit more than 20 minutes. So if it's too long, just cut me off because I can cut it off anytime.
That's fine, Fraser. No worries. Thank you.
There are 4 possible ways to interact with people, and that applies both to corporations and individuals. The first way is win-lose, meaning I'll try to win at your expense, so you must lose. And that's the most common way. A second way is win-win, meaning I want to win in our relationship and I want you to win also. The third way is lose-win, meaning I'll accept losing to let you win. Then I'll justify being your victim. And the last way is lose-lose. I'm willing to lose just to make you lose too. I'll get my revenge. Let's start off with the most common way, win-lose. The win-lose approach permeates our whole society. Just think of our legal system, for example. It's all win-lose because it's adversarial to its core. If I'm to win my case in court against you, you've got to lose. If you win, I must lose. That's the way the legal system works. I mean, who ever heard of both sides winning in a court case? In all boxing rings and hockey arenas, that's where true competition can happen. It's both fun to watch and participate in good, clean competition where skill plus effort can result in winning a game. So then it's fine. But most of us don't spend our lives in competition, do we? We don't live each day competing with our co-workers or our spouses or our children or our friends, do we? Who's winning in each of your relationships? What a crazy question that is. If both sides aren't winning, both are losing. If we want satisfying relationships with other people, we must stop thinking win-lose. Here's a win-lose story. Catherine's parents were always winners in their relationship with their daughter. From the time she was just a little girl, her parents won every dispute. They got their way with Catherine by using their 4 Ps as weapons against her: their position, their power, their possessions, and their personality, which was authoritarian, dictatorial. Catherine was never allowed to make a choice or to decide anything for herself. She was told how she must think and feel and behave, and that was backed up by threats. Catherine grew up to be a compliant, timid, fearful, and withdrawn little girl, and with dreadful self-esteem. And her parents were so proud of her obedience. She never causes us any concern. And that's what they told everybody. But when she became a teenager, Catherine tried to rebel just a little bit by changing her hairstyle, but she was squashed so harshly, she quickly changed it back to what her parents demanded. When Catherine was 16, unfortunately, she began to drink alcohol heavily because it dulled her pain. And at 16, she became pregnant. And 9 months later, her baby boy was born. And the baby failed to thrive, however, and was later diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome. By then, her parents the constant winners wanted nothing more to do with their ungrateful daughter, so they disowned her. And of course, they blamed Catherine for all her problems and never admitted any fault of their own. Win-lose relationships often have a sad ending like this, since complete control of another person always leads to trouble because you can't love what you control. Now let's talk about win-win. I want to win, but I want you to win too. This way of thinking says, and was best described by Stephen Covey in his brilliant book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a frame of mind and heart that constantly seeks mutual benefit so that all parties can feel good about the decisions and feel committed to the resulting plan of action. Win-win says, let's cooperate, not compete. Win-win believes that for one person to be successful, another does not need to fail. It's not your way, and it's not my way. It's the better way that we both want. If a company wants to be successful, it will ensure that its employees win as often as possible. And that doesn't mean the company loses, because it will win too, because the employees will then work for the company, not just with their hands and their heads, but with their hearts too. They'll give loyalty, not just perfunctory performance. Think of a car salesman who used the win-win principle. He wants his customers to win. He wants his customers to get a car that's right for them at a fair price. And to that end, the salesman is really an assistant buyer. That's the best definition for a good salesman. He's an assistant buyer. It's his job to ensure that the principal buyer wins. He never sees them as suckers. And of course, the salesman deserves to win also, and he will. By making a fair profit on the sale, a profit that he deserves, he's very likely to gain customer loyalty also, and thus win by getting future business. The best salesmen consistently demonstrate a win-win mindset. They are providing a necessary service, in reality, a spiritual service, because win-win is a spiritual principle. It requires integrity to strive for win-win. Win-lose is easy, doesn't require any integrity. Win-win works with parenting too. If you parents want your children to be winners, then make sure they don't always lose their battles with you. For if, when the children are young, you insist on always winning the little battles, like what they wear, how they keep their hair, the music they listen to, then when they're teenagers and become more independent, you risk losing the war. It's much smarter to let children enjoy some wins in their negotiations with you, so that when it comes to things like that are not really negotiable, like whether they use addictive drugs, then you can act from strength. Look for a win-win solution with children at every opportunity. That means accepting their input into decisions that affect them. That means listening hard to what they have to say and not ignoring it. So smart parents learn how to avoid many win-lose conflicts, as in this little story. Mom gave her sons, who were both very young, when she gave them anything, one of the boys would loudly complain if they thought the other was being favored, even in the slightest. Like, he got a better birthday present than I did, or Mom, you gave him more ice cream than I got. So today, when Mom had only one big piece of chocolate cake left for dessert, she announced it would be split between the two boys. Each of them hovered over the cake to ensure that Mom would divide it equally, exactly. And Mom knew if she didn't slice the cake precisely, if one piece happened to be even a smidgen smaller, she'd only please one son, and she'd have to listen to, oh, he got a bigger piece than I did. And then an inspiration hit Mom. Do you know how she handled the situation? Anybody know the answer? Well, here's what Mom did. Here's the knife, she said to the older boy. You get to divide it. And then your brother will be allowed to choose whatever piece he wants. No surgeon ever applied a scalpel more skillfully than that little boy, as he ever so carefully and conscientiously cut the cake while his mom relaxed with her coffee. Here's a story about a business executive who joined the Army. He with a win-win. He started off with a win-lose mindset. His name was Brent, and he was a bright young executive, a rising star in the large corporation where he worked. Definitely a cut above the ordinary. The betting was that Brent would become that company's CEO someday, because everything about him matched what the company stood for. They competed ruthlessly to win in their market. And then, to his shock and disappointment, Brent was called up for military service. Having to become a soldier was a huge step down in his career. That's what Brent thought, for the Army couldn't teach him anything worthwhile. At least it would only be a temporary setback, because the company guaranteed him a position would be waiting for him when he was finished. So there they were on Brent's first day in the Army, all the new recruits standing at attention in their barracks. They were positioned at the foot of their new beds. The sergeant entered. "Here are the sheets, blankets, and pillowcases for your beds," he yelled. "When everybody has theirs, I will order you to start making your beds, and I will give you exactly 60 seconds to do a good job." On the sergeant's command, Brent and all the others rushed to make their beds. It was easy for Brent, since his mother had him make his own bed as a child, and Brent had continued the practice when he went to college and later to his own apartment. Brent was an excellent bread maker, and he easily finished in 45 seconds. Many of the other men finished early too. Then they all stood and watched while the slackers struggled to finish on time. At 60 seconds, the sergeant blew a whistle, and everybody stopped, including those who were only halfway finished, and those whose bedding was still full of wrinkles. "Everybody strip your beds," the sergeant bellowed. "All of you, everything off, and then start over. You got 60 seconds again." Hey, wait a minute, Brent thought. Why should I have to do it again? Or the others who finished early? What a waste of time and effort. If this is the Army's way, the Army is even dumber than I thought. If Brent thought that was stupid, he was dumbfounded when the sergeant repeated the same scenario again and again and again. He continued to command everybody to strip their beds and then remake them over and over and over. After 20 times, Brent was seething with anger and indignation. His respect for the Army was lower than low. If this Army were a corporation, Brent thought, they'd be out of business in a week. And the whole exercise is so obviously unfair, Brent reflected. It doesn't make any sense that I and the others who can do it right have to suffer just because the few people can't perform. They have probably never made a bed in their lives. Brent looked over at the fat, clumsy, sweating recruit at the bed beside his, and he hadn't once succeeded in making it within the time limit. I don't think he's ever going to do it, Brent moaned to himself. Because of him, the rest of us could be up all night wasting our time. This is so idiotic. And then during the next 60-second rush, on their 21st try, Brent noticed something different. 5 beds away from his own, a short guy who, like Brent, had always furnished Ernie, was helping a tall guy who was one of the repeat failures. The two of them were working together on one bed. And when at 60 seconds, the sergeant blew his whistle, both beds, the short guys and the tall guys, were completely made and made well. And other recruits happened to notice this also. Again, the sergeant bellowed his command. Strip your beds and do it again. This time, Brent really rushed and finished in 25 seconds. Then he ran over to the next bed and helped the fat, clumsy guy. And other speedsters did the same with other slow guys. And when the whistle blew again, every bed was made perfectly. The sergeant looked around the barracks and nodded his approval. And then he spoke, less gruffly now. That's how we do things in this Army. We're a team. We take care of one another. If you're ever in battle, remember that. It could save your friend's life or yours. So Brent, whose mindset was always win-lose, could see that in this incident, at least, win-win, one note. Whether it changed them permanently or not, I don't know. Okay, let's talk about lose-win. I'll lose and let you win, because I want you to get a really clear idea about all of these. But some people really try to operate that way in a relationship, where they are willing, even wanting to lose. Unfortunately for them, the answer is yes. In the extreme, they are doormats who let other people wipe their feet on them. They are the rugs who allow others to walk all over them. They may like to think that they are peacemakers, but they'll go to any extent to keep peace. Wives who continually tolerate abusive husbands are one example. Instead of standing up for their rights, those wives say, in effect, go ahead, have your way with me. You can do whatever you want, and I won't resist. That's the attitude that lose-win people have. They seek their strength from being popular and accepted and liked. They never say no when someone asks something of them. They don't have the courage to express their own opinions, and they're easily intimidated. Teenagers who smoke or get drunk or do drugs or beat up somebody, not because they themselves want to, but just to get in good with a group, they're acting in a lose-win way. They're going against being their best selves to win the friendship of others. Yes, for teens, peer pressure and lose-win go hand in hand. If lose-win people happen to be bosses or employers, they'll be permissive and indulgent to the extreme and allow those for whom they are responsible to feed on them and do practically anything without a consequence. And the same with parents. Lose-win means they are permissive to the extreme, allowing their children to run all over them. When the parent spoils them, they often pretend that they're just being kind, misrepresenting their parental lack of authority as warm-heartedness. Besides being ineffective, lose-win people usually bury their emotions. They may appear normal on the outside, but inside they're seething with anger and resentment. Here's a true story that's a lose-win story. Helga was born in New York City to Polish immigrant parents, and they were very strict disciplinarians, as we heard earlier in an earlier story. Helga grew up to be a shy, introverted girl with such a low self-esteem that she had a deep sense of her own worthlessness. Despite this, she was bright. She got high marks through high school, and after graduating from college, she became a grade 3 teacher. Helga fell in love with Joel Steiner. Joel had been born to wealthy parents and had a privileged youth, and he too had always been smart in school, received a scholarship to college where he got a degree in political science. Later, he took his law degree at New York University, and then Joel made a lot of money as a New York lawyer. At first, when Joel and Helga lived together, things seemed okay, but soon Joel began to abuse Helga emotionally. He didn't hit her. It was what he said that hurt. Nothing Helga did seemed to make Joel happy, and he always let her know it. Helga had such low self-esteem that she assumed that Joel must be right about her. Despite doing well in school and being competent at her job, she always felt worthless. And the fact that she was being treated that way, well, it somehow seemed to fit. She never complained to anybody or ever tried to leave Joel. Because Helga had done well, both in school and at her job, she had a good self-concept. She had a decent self-image. She was bright and capable, and she knew that. But deep down, she never felt good enough. That's the difference between self-concept and self-esteem. You can have a positive self-image, a good self-concept, because you recognize your abilities, and still have negative self-esteem where you never feel worthy or good enough to merit being treated with respect and dignity, and whole enough to deserve real happiness. In fact, no amount of self-improvement can make up for a lack of self-acceptance. No amount of doing can compensate for a lack of being. Yes, achievement alone is not a solution for low self-esteem, which is actually a form of self-hate. Hilda suffered humiliation for 2 years psychologically, but then it turned to physical abuse. One day, Joel punched her in the eye, hard enough that it affected her eyesight. When she showed up at work with a black eye, she told the other teachers that she'd been mugged. The next time she arrived at work with a black eye, she said she had walked into a door. After that, as the beatings continued, she took to wearing sunglasses, both summer and winter. To ease her pain, Hilda took cocaine, and soon both she and Joel were addicted to that drug. When Joel got high, he punched out Hilda, but she never told anybody, not even the time that he hit her hard enough to rupture her spleen. Hilda crawled out of the apartment, took a cab to the hospital, had her spleen removed, and then returned to Joel. As this was going on, there was a young unwed girl who became pregnant. Instead of having an abortion, she decided to put her baby up for adoption. Hilda and Joel took the baby, who was named Lisa. Over the next 5 years, Joel continued to abuse Hilda. When he became angry or got high on drugs, he would choke and kick her, but she never complained to anybody that could help her. She didn't have enough self-esteem to fight back. It's really hard to resist and say no when you have such low self-esteem, because what other people think of you is more important than what you think about yourself. When Lisa was 5 years old, Joel started to abuse her too. Lisa wore long-sleeve shirts to school to hide the bruises. And one day, after a particularly bad beating, Lisa stopped breathing. Finally, Hilda did something. She phoned the police. When help arrived, they detected a pulse on Lisa and rushed her to the hospital. But 3 days later, at the age of 6, Lisa died of her injuries. Hilda had such low self-esteem that it cost her her own happiness, and now it had cost Lisa her life. Joel was convicted of manslaughter and went to prison. How many more Hildas are out there suffering in silence because they lack sufficient self-esteem to stick up for themselves? From Hilda, you can see that self-esteem doesn't depend on intelligence or ability or money, but she had plenty of those. It depends on one thing, a belief that you're worthy. And when you know that, you will never allow anybody to abuse you without fighting back. Now, in case you think that this is rare, in today's Star, if you read it, here's a letter to dear Ellie in this morning's Star. And the question she asked is, this is about my boyfriend. He used to be the sweetest person and super kind and caring. He still is still nice sometimes, but now I'm terrified that if I say anything wrong, he'll get mad. When that happens, I shake and beg him to stop, and I cry. I'm afraid of him, and I don't know how to leave him. We've been together for 2 years, and I'm scared. What do I do? And here's part of Ellie's answer. She starts off, living in fear of someone is not a relationship. This man isn't a boyfriend to you. He's a controller who gets his power by threatening and fighting you. If you two live together, you must make a private, secure plan to leave him before he harms you severely. He's dangerous to you. And Ellie in today's Star goes on to at length to tell the questioner what to do. So it's still happening. Okay, here's a story that I like, that I heard first from Wayne Dyer, now deceased. And it starts off as a win-lose, but then turns into a win-win. Her name was Mrs. Thompson as she stood in front of her 5th grade class on the very first day of school. She told the children a lie. Like most teachers, she looked at the students and said that she loved them all the same, but that was impossible because there in the front row was a little boy named Teddy Stoddard. Mrs. Thompson had watched Teddy the year before and noticed that he didn't play well with the other children, that his clothes were messy, and he constantly needed a bath. he usually smelled, and Teddy could be very unpleasant. It got to the point where Mrs. Thompson would actually take delight in marking his papers with a big red pen, marking bold X's, and then putting a big fat F for failure at the top of his papers. So now we have a win-lose as the teacher happily defeats Teddy with her red X's. At the school where Mrs. Thompson taught, she was required to review each child's past records, and she put Teddy off until the last. However, when she reviewed his file, she was in for a surprise. Teddy's first grade teacher had written, quote, "Teddy is a bright child with a ready laugh. He does his work neatly, has good manners, and is a joy to be around." The second grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is an excellent student, well liked by his classmates, but he is troubled because his mother has a terminal illness, and his life at home is a struggle." His third grade teacher wrote, "His mother's death has been hard on Teddy. He tries to do his best, but his father doesn't show much interest. His home life will soon affect him if some steps aren't taken." The fourth grade teacher wrote, "Teddy's withdrawn, doesn't allow or show much interest in school, and he doesn't have any friends. He sometimes falls asleep in class." And by now, Mrs. Thompson realized what the problem had been, and she felt ashamed of herself. She felt even worse when her students brought her Christmas presents wrapped with beautiful ribbons and bright paper, except for Teddy. His present was clumsily wrapped in heavy brown paper that he got from a grocery bag. Mrs. Thompson took pains to open it in the middle of the other presents. Some of the children started to laugh when she found a rhinestone bracelet with some of the stones missing and a bottle that was half full of perfume. But she stifled the children's laughter when she exclaimed how pretty the bracelet was, putting it on and dabbing some of the perfume on her wrist. Teddy stayed after school that day just long enough to say to Mrs. Thompson, "You smell just like my mother used to." After all the children left, she cried for at least an hour. On that very day, she quit teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. Instead, she began to teach children. Mrs. Thompson paid particular attention to Teddy as she worked with him. And when she did that, his mind seemed to come alive. The more she encouraged him, the faster he responded. By the end of the year, Teddy had become one of the smartest children in the class and the teacher's pet. 1 year later, she found a note under her door from Teddy telling her she was the best teacher that he ever had in his whole life. 6 years went by before she got another note from Teddy. He then wrote that he had finished high school, third in his class, and that she was still the best teacher he ever had in his whole life. 4 years after that, 4 years, she got another note saying that things had been tough, but he'd stayed in school and gone on to graduate from college with the highest honors. He said that Mrs. Thompson was still his favorite teacher, the best he'd ever had in his whole life. 4 more years passed, and now another letter came. This time, he explained that he had got his bachelor's degree, and he decided to go a little further. The letter explained that Mrs. Thompson was still the best and the favorite teacher he ever had, but now his name was a little bit longer. The letter was signed Thomas F. Stoddard, MD. The story doesn't quite end there. There was another letter that spring. Teddy said he met a girl. His father had died, and he wondered if Mrs. Thompson might agree to sit at his wedding in the place usually reserved for the mother of the groom. And of course, Mrs. Thompson did, and they hugged each other. And Dr. Stoddard whispered in Mrs. Thompson's ear, "Thank you. Thank you so much for making me feel important and showing me that I could make a difference." And Mrs. Thompson, with tears in her eyes, whispered back, "Teddy, you've got that wrong. You, you were the one who taught me that I could make a difference. Before you, I didn't know how to teach. And then I met you. End of story. Now, the next is lose-lose. And that's rare. And it's, I've got a story for that too, but I don't know whether I should go on because I don't want to take more time than I should. Do you want me to keep going to meet or not?
It's up to the audience. So what do you think, guys? Do you want to Fraser continue? Yes. So they want you to continue. Thank you,
All right.
Fraser.
Here's a lose-lose story. Brady was scanning the newspaper looking for a used car for sale, and he saw this ad: nearly new Cadillac, fully equipped, excellent condition, $20. And then the phone number was there. Brady decided that they had probably misprinted $20,000 and continued to read the paper. But as he looked at the other ads, his curiosity grew, and so he phoned the number and the paper. And he said to the lady who answered, how much is it for the Cadillac? 20,000? And the lady said, no, it's $20. And the car, and she assured him the car hadn't been stolen, that it was a legitimate sale. And the woman on the sound sounded sincere, so Brady's out of curiosity, he drove over to her house. And the whole way over, he was trying to decide whether to laugh or get angry when he finally found out what was really wrong. But when he looked at the house, he was flabbergasted. There in the driveway was the Cadillac, exactly as described, nearly new, fully equipped, excellent condition. Brady confirmed the price was $20, and the lady gave him the keys and told him to test drive it. Brady checked under the hood, checked the serial number. He phoned the Ministry of Transportation to ensure it wasn't stolen, and then he went out on Highway 401 and drove it. And finally, he went back to the house, and feeling kind of foolish, he took out $20 from his wallet and handed it to the woman. She said, "You just bought yourself a car." "Wait a minute," Brady pleaded. "Please tell me, why are you willing to sell a valuable car for only $20? I have to know." "Well, it's simple," said the woman. "My husband, the skunk, ran off with a secretary last month, so I'm divorcing him. The judge ordered me to sell the car and give him half. I could hardly wait to see his face when I hand him $10. So she was willing to lose all that money, her half of the 20,000, just to hurt her husband. How do you know when you're in a win-win relationship? Because that's the question that I want you to ask yourself about all the relationships that you have. Well, you treat each other with respect and dignity, even if you are the boss speaking to an employee, or a teacher speaking to a student, or a parent speaking to a child. And even if you are disciplining them at the time, you treat them with respect. What's an alternative relationship? Well, I win-lose, that's easy. You're the boss, you've got the power, you've got the authority. So it's easy to take control, to be in charge. But when you go win-lose, you will damage your win-win, and it may be difficult to restore. You can tell you're in a win-win by how you feel. You're not stressed or tense when you're interacting, but you're relaxed, enjoying your time together. And that's because you trust them. You trust them to have your best interest at heart, just as you have for them. You trust them not to take advantage of you, not to hurt you, at least not on purpose. One mother and teenager were having a difficult time in their relationship. And so the mother said to her son, "I've been thinking about our relationship lately, and I'm not entirely sure where it stands. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being low and 10 being high, where would you rate our relationship?" And the teenager said, I think it's a 5. And then Mom asked a brilliant, brilliant question. Okay, she said to her son, but tell me this, what is it that you think I'm doing right that makes it a 5 instead of a 1 or 2? I'd like to do more of that, whatever it is. So tell me, how can I love and support you better so our relationship can grow beyond a 5? Here's my final question. What fuels win-win? What emotion fuels the desire to seek win-win relationships instead of the far more common win-lose? What motivates someone to want the other person in the relationship to win? What's the driving force? And the answer is the emotion of love. In a relationship, sometimes love gets lost and it has to be rediscovered. And if that ever happens to you, it will require you to think about yourself, to think hard and honestly. And that can be difficult because if in thinking you discover things you don't like about yourself, that can be painful. But remember, of all the thoughts you have in life, none matter more than thoughts you have about yourself. And that's why self-examination is so important, as in this story. And this is my last story. Two strangers sat on a plane side by side, one man, one woman. After some small talk, the woman asked the man what he did for a living. The man responded that he was a relationship coach. Well, said the woman, my husband and I have a lousy relationship. That's because he never listens to me. And for the next hour, she droned on and on about all the troubles in her marriage because my husband never listens to me. Her voice was tense and angry. Finally, she stopped talking and asked the man, can you suggest anything? Well, I could, replied her seatmate, but you won't like what I suggest. And that surprised the woman. Well, go ahead anyway, she said. I think, said the man, that your husband is not the problem in your relationship. I think you are. The woman was startled and very resentful. She turned to the window and stared out of it for the next hour. As the plane landed, the lady spoke once more to the man. Well, why do you think I'm the problem? And he said, let me ask you this. Do you get angry at your husband before you talk to him or afterwards? Oh, I get angry at him before, she said, because I know what I say will just go in one of his ears and out the other. He hasn't listened to me in years. I'm mad at him right now, just thinking about that. Has it ever occurred to you, said the man, that the reason your husband doesn't listen to you is because of your anger? Maybe if you changed your approach and talked to him in a respectful way, even a loving way, he would listen. The man got up, got his bag from the overhead bin and left. And 5 weeks later, he received a phone call from that lady. I just wanted to thank you for what you told me on the airplane, she said. I certainly didn't like it at the time, but I thought about it later. I really went inside myself and asked if it could be true. And then I thought about my husband and all the really good qualities that he has that I've ignored for years. Somehow I was able to let go of my anger towards him. And now when we talk, he's so different. Our relationship has never been better. He had changed completely, my husband has. No, came the response, you've changed completely. Congratulations. Here are my last 10 words. And if you don't remember anything else, remember these 10 words. I'll see a better thee when I become a better me. I'll see a better thee when I become a better me. Thank you.